Hey, welcome to Miss Flame Paints. I'm going to paint Sibyl from Massive Darkness. She has a really nice skirt from Leaves, which I'm gonna go try to give some subtle details. Since she is an elf, I try to use more forest colors. Here you can notice that I've applied a shade on Owen to the recesses of his red robe. Now let's paint. I primed the miniature in the color Standard Grey from Citadel. Before I primed the miniature, I washed it with warm water and dishwasher soap to make sure the primer stays on well. For the skin, I used the colors Pale Flesh with Brown Sand from Vallejo. This time I used a bit more Pale Flesh than Brown Sand. I started with a mix of 50-50 of these colors, and to that mix I just added a bit more Pale Flesh. I'll paint her face and hands with this color. To avoid any gray spots between colors later on, paint the areas next to the face and hands also with this color a bit. For the skirt, I will use the color Ardennes Green from scale 75. This will be my base color for the skirt, so I'll make sure to cover every bit with this color. This is going to be my darkest green color. When that is dry, I will apply a shade with a 50-50 mix of Biel-Tan green with Agrax Earthshade from Citadel to the skirt. This will help to darken the color and to get the darkest color in the recesses. With this shade, it is easier to see the lines and flow of the leaves. This will help me when I will apply the lighter colors. For the shirt and the highlights on the leaves, I use a 50-50 mix of Ardennes Green with Sherwood Green from scale 75. I start by painting the leaves. I will not paint the whole skirt with this color. For my first layer, I thin down the paint more than I normally would. I paint the leaves from the part it would divide itself from the whole skirt. For the second layer, I start to paint a smaller part of the leaves, depending on the size of the leaves, but as an indicator I start about halfway down from the previous step. I want the tips of the leaves to be a lighter color of green. For the third layer, I paint just a bit above the tips and I paint the edges. The edges are really small to paint. I use a little bit of paint on my brush. After painting the leaves, I also decided to paint the shirt in this color. For the tips of the leaves and the small sword, I used the colors Sherwood Green with Spring Green from scale 75. I'll mix these colors with a 50-50 ratio. So 1 drop of Sherwood Green with 1 drop of Spring Green. I'll paint the tips of the leaves with this color. And after painting the hair, I will also paint the hairband with this color. I found the color of the shirt to be too dark. I will use a 50-50 mix of the color I've just used for the tips and mix it with the color Ardennes Green. I apply a very thin layer of this color on the shirt. For the hair, I will use the color Chocolate Brown with English Uniform from Vallejo. I'll mix 1 drop of Chocolate Brown with 1 drop of English Uniform. For this step, I have to watch out to not paint over any adjacent areas, because most parts have already been painted. After that, I will shade the hair with a 50-50 mix of Nuln Oil with Agrax Earthshade. Make sure to get the shade in all the small areas of the hair. For the highlight, I will add some more English Uniform to the color I've just used to paint the hair. With this color, I'll paint the upper parts of the hair and leave the recesses with a darker color. The areas to paint are very small. I will use a little bit of paint on my brush to get more control of where I paint. For the bow, I use Sombre Grey from Vallejo. For the quiver, I will use Sombre Grey with Arpen Jade from scale 75. I will use a little bit more of Arpen Jade than Sombre Grey. So I'll first mix a 50-50 mix of these colors and then just add a little bit more of Arpen Jade until I have a color which I like. For the belt and the two pouches, I will use Earth from Vallejo. There is a small pouch on her back which I will paint. This one is very easy to miss. I had a bit of trouble to paint the belt on her left side, but with some patience you will have no problem. It's just a very small area to paint. For the arrows, I use the color German Orange Ochre from Vallejo. For the armor on her arms and legs, I start by applying a 50-50 mix of Ghost Grey with Sky Grey on the arms. Then for the legs, I will use Ghost Grey again, but this time with just a little bit of chocolate brown. A small amount will be enough. I'll paint over both parts with a thin layer of silver. I want the color under the silver to still show a bit. The difference between the legs and the arms is very subtle. You will not really notice it, but only if you take a closer look at the miniature. I can see the different colors showing through, but if you want, you can paint the arms and the legs in the same color, in which color you prefer. For all the golden details, I use the color Polished Gold from Vallejo. There are so many small details all over the miniatures. I paint the sword, buckle, details on the pouches, bow and quiver with this color. I will now shade the miniature. I start by applying Reikland Fleshshade from Citadel to her skin. I will use this on her face and hands. Then for the armor, bow and quiver, I use Nuln Oil from Citadel. I finish by applying Agrax Earthshade from Citadel to the brown and green parts. I will use this shade on the belt and pouches, sword and the shirt. After the shade, I'll first go back with the color Polished Gold. I will use a thin layer of this color to retouch all the golden details. I want to bring back the shine which the shade has removed. For the skin, I will use the same color which I've used for the base layer. So a 50-50 mix of pale flesh with brown sand, and then add just a bit more pale flesh to that mix. I'll paint the raised areas with this color. So her forehead, nose, cheeks, chin and the raised parts of the hands. I'll apply a small amount of Reikland Fleshshade to her lips. Then for the eyes, I will use one dot of black in each eye socket. The miniature is all done now. The only thing left to do is to do the base. I will start to paint the whole base with Huldra blue and Arianrhod blue from scale 75. I'll mix 1 drop of Huldra blue with 1 drop of Arianrhod blue. I'll paint the whole base with this color. I'll paint the patterns of the stone with a 50-50 mix of Graphene Grey from scale 75 with black from Vallejo. At the end, I will also use this color to paint the trim of the base. Then I will use the color Sombre Grey from Vallejo. I'll paint about 50% of the stones with a thin layer of this paint. Of the stones painted with this color, I will also go over with a very thin layer of the color of the base. This way I can create different shades of blue stones on the base, from the darker stones to the lighter stones and some colors in between. Here I apply the same color that I painted the patterns of the stones on the trim. After letting the miniature dry for at least 24 hours, I applied the anti-shine matte varnish from the Army Painter. So that's another miniature all done painted. I really had some fun painting the skirt. That's also the thing that attracted me the most to this miniature. I had these dark green colors and then I started to add those lighter layers. I was not sure like how I would do it and if it would look good, because adding those first lighter layers, I was actually a bit scared because the light color was like popping so much while it was still wet. So I just had to be patient a bit, wait for the layers to dry, and then I could see the really nice effect of the darker color and having these lighter green colors over, just transitioning slowly to the tips of the leaves. And there I put this really popping green color. I don't know, it just worked well and I just had great fun. I learned so much. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. If you have any questions, you can always leave them in the comments below. And I hope to see you next time.